We read news every day. News that's informative, but rarely encouraging. The InterMountain Christian newspaper aims to change that. They present the news you need to know, from what's going on in your community to your world, with encouraging words, motivation, and the resources you need to make positive changes in your life. What is your local government doing that you need to know about? What's happening in your community you need to be a part of? Whether it's a story from your neighborhood, a national story, or an encouraging word, you'll find biblical issues of everyday life in the InterMountain Christian newspaper. InterMountain Christian News is produced and supported by the work and donations of individuals and churches. You'll find it at churches, Christian bookstores, by subscription, and online at IMCNews.org. To find out more about supporting this local resource, go online at IMCNews.org or call InterMountain Christian News in Boise, Idaho at 208-703-8688. The InterMountain Christian News, a voice sharing the truth on matters dear to people's hearts.
Are you tired of the secular news? Do you want a Christian view of politics? Do you want to know what is going on in your Christian community? Your wait is over. Welcome to the InterMountain Christian News Hour. Here is your host, Dr. Anthony Harper.
I'm Dr. Anthony Harper here with the InterMountain Christian News Hour. We are a voice of truth, and we report the truth about what is happening in Israel. And Barry Shaw joins me from Israel to talk about the boycotting movement, the boycotting of Israel products. Barry, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. Shalom from Israel.
I love that word, shalom, and I love to sing the Israeli national anthem in Hebrew, and a wonderful song, Hatikva.
Yes, it means hope.
Yes, and Barry, it's a very serious problem, about what's happening with Israel. The boycotting is one of a couple of issues, and of course, here in light of, I just read in Israel a news service, Erosheva, or Rusheva, maybe you might pronounce it, that President Obama wants to divide Jerusalem by the end of the year and support the Palestinian statehood at the UN before he leaves office. Very disturbing.
Yes, exactly. It seems he has an agenda that he wants to apply before, as you say, Anthony, before he leaves office. But everything will be done over here to reduce the damage, and hopefully the next president will rescind a lot of the damage that, unfortunately, the American president has done in Israel.
Very serious issue, and there are blessings for those that bless Israel and curses for those that curse Israel from the book of Genesis, Old Testament, and it's a very serious problem. I love Israel. I want to report the truth about what's really going on, and there seems to be an ever-increasing oppression of Israel and trying to hurt Israel, and this boycotting is one of those issues. Explain for our listeners what the BDS, stands for, and this boycotting increase that is happening.
What you're seeing here, you opened with as you rightly said, the steps being taken by President Obama against Israel, but he's a product of an upbringing, and certainly a campus upbringing as well. And what we're seeing throughout the world, in Europe, in the West, and into America as well, the campuses has been taken over by a lot of radical left-wing professors and teaching staff, often funded by monies from countries like Saudi Arabia, etc. And it's producing the graduates. The graduates are becoming the opinion makers and the influence makers in Western societies. In America in particular, one example of that has been Barack Obama. And you're going to get more of this in America. They have they prefer to call the use of language liberal, progressive languages, policies, and etc., which is absolutely destroying the world. Unfortunately, one of the targets of this is Israel, because under people like President Obama, all allies of the United States are no longer seen as allies, and the enemies who should be the enemies of the United States and will be in the future. They like to really appeal and appease countries like, for instance, Iraq or Iran, and we can see the products of this. The nuclear deal with Iran is an absolute disaster. Even our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, did his best to offset it, but unfortunately the Congress is full of Democrats who, in support of Obama and his policies, couldn't see the wood for the trees, and therefore they supported this Obama very bad deal with Iran, which could lead to a nuclear cloud somewhere over the Middle East. So we feel very badly deserted by the Obama administration. And although we had a visit last week from Joe Biden, the vice president, we're waiting here for the other shoe to drop. And that shoe is going to drop very loudly. But you're going to find that Israel is resolute and Israel is strong, and we will resist whatever measures they want to impose. If they want to pose it, even the United Nations in the Security Council resolution, it doesn't mean that Israel is going to withdraw to the lines that you spoke about, which was once referred to as the Auschwitz lines. We've taken that line sometime in the past, not too distant past, but we still have memories.
It's very upsetting.
The Jewish state is strong and will remain strong.
Now, I know President Obama could try to threaten with Israel with not sending financial assistance, as the U.S. has done in the past. And my concern is for the Prime Minister and Israel is not to be intimidated by the threats of President Obama, and that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob can defend Israel.
Well, I hope, Anthony, that, even if Obama was to do another of his illegal executive orders with his pen and sign away these sort of things that you're talking about, that Israel has the back of the majority of the American people. Because, quite frankly, you gave this quotation before, about God will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you, and you have seen this in other countries who also have been at the forefront of passing all sorts of resolutions and boycotts and labeling resolutions against Israel, namely Europe, for instance. And Europe now is suffering from a tsunami of Muslim migrants that are reaping chaos throughout Europe. You only have to see what's happened to a once tolerant, multicultural, and compassionate Europe. They are putting up the shutters, they're in despair, and Europe is sinking. Can I put it bluntly? I remember going back a few years here in Netanya, where we sit around and have coffee and discuss politics and world affairs. I remember one old guy who had a number stamped on his arm from when he was in one of the concentration camps. And even then said this is going back over 10 years, Anthony, that God will punish Europe for what they did to the Jews. He will give them the Muslims. He will give them Islam. And you can see this is happening. The curse that you mentioned, you can see it today in Europe. And quite frankly, I would ask you and your listeners, do you really think that after so many years of Obama leadership, that America is stronger today, economically, socially, militarily? Is it stronger or weaker?
That's a good question.
I'll leave your listeners to come to their own conclusion.
Well,
God will bless those that bless Israel and curse those that curse Israel. And if Obama wants to curse Israel, we hope and pray the next president will have greater wisdom than Obama. And you'll have prosperity and harmony coming back to America once again.
You know, that verse is from Genesis chapter 3, Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and and whoever curses you, I will curse. Curses you, I will curse. I also thought, Barry, there's a wonderful Old Testament scripture about dividing the land, this two-state solution regarding what President Obama wants to do. It's in Prophet Joel, chapter 3, verse 2, in the King James Bible here, that stating that the God enters into judgment in the valley Jehoshaphat, the nations that divide up his land. And from what I understand, when God enters into judgment against a nation, he's angry.
I want to tell you, one of the things I do on a daily basis, I'm what's called a senior associate for public diplomacy for what's called the Israeli Institute of Strategic Studies.
Uh-huh.
And I had a meeting today just before I came back to have this talk with you, Anthony, with Martin Sherman. And Martin takes a very clear thinking view of this. It is both militarily, defensively, security, and morally wrong for the world to put this pressure on Israel in view of the fact that we are facing here a homeopathic, radical, racist, anti-Semitic enemy in what they call the Palestinians. And for the world and Obama to appease, to sacrifice Israel in the establishment of a homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim majority tyranny is absolute nonsense. Whoever thinks that if Israel did the foolish thing and would withdraw to 1967 lies, that suddenly a permanent peace, everlasting peace will break out, is misguided, totally misguided. Because whatever Palestinian state will be created, I promise you this, that you will see Hamas flags flying over the old city of Jerusalem. Because by the ballot or the bullet, any Palestinian state will be usurped and taken over by Islamic Hamas.
Yes. You know, there are U.S. tax dollars going into some UN agencies, and what I understand, and those UN agencies, UNRWA, one of them in curriculum in the schools inciting violence against the Jews.
Yeah, well, I have 2 points to make to this. Joe Biden was over here, and as he got off the plane, an American was killed in Tel Aviv by a Palestinian terrorist.
Yes.
You remember that last week?
Very upsetting.
And America keeps pumping billions of dollars, your taxpayers' dollars, into the Palestinians while they are trying to murder their way to a state.
Well,
and Americans are being killed.
I know somehow, Barry, Hamas is getting access to those funds that the U.S. is sending over to these UN schools or agencies.
Okay, but you say Hamas, but don't just isolate it Hamas, it's the Palestinians. I don't care who you talk about, whether it's the Fatah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad or those under Mahmoud Abbas, they're all Palestinians. Even if the money goes to the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, it's being spent for terrorism, it's being spent on incitement to kill Jews, it's being spent on the desire and ambition, one way or the other, to destroy the Jewish state.
Well, hopefully the U.S. will reconsider and cease that financial support of the Palestinian Authority and the UN schools.
But this is what some of your listeners, or all of your listeners, should do. They should be contacting the senators and congressmen and said, not one more dime, not more $1 until the Palestinian leadership everywhere rescind their incitement, rescind the hate campaign and murder campaign against Jews and Israel, because Christians are being targeted by this as well.
Yes.
You don't hear about this, but I'm sure you've had on your program, especially if you take the little town, the once biblical town of Bethlehem, when it was under Israeli control, 80% of the population of Bethlehem were Christians, middle-class Christians.
Yes.
But since we were made to withdraw due to the Oslo Accords and put in the hands of the Palestinian Authority, the Christian population of Bethlehem is now less than 10%.
And the Christian people are oppressed and abused in Bethlehem by the Palestinian Authority.
Exactly. That's why they leave.
Yes.
Now they say, those who support the Palestinian cause and also spread the lies and slanders against Israel said, well, the reason the Christians have fled is because of the security wall and the checkpoints that are around there. But it's very funny. The Muslim population of Bethlehem has increased threefold. So how is it that the Christian population fled because of the security wall, and yet the Muslim population has increased?
Yes. So,
do the math.
Yes, favoritism to the Muslims.
Do the maths. It's again part of the lies. And for your listeners who are in support of Israel, when you hear all these slanders going on against Israel, you've got to look for the truth. And the truth is simple. It's out there. You take the argument of the anti-Israel campaigners. I mean, you talked about the boycott, BDS, for instance, and you simply have to address the truth because they are seducing people, even really well-intended Christians, about perceived crimes that Israel is supposed to be perpetrating. But the truth is, these are untrue. They're lies.
Well, we need to talk about definitely some more about BDS, Barry. I know it stands for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions. And so what is the situation about the boycotting of Israel? What's the details? What's happening?
Well, this is another thing that's been going on for quite some time. People are trying to destroy Israel economically, not just politically, but economically. And there is a huge campaign made up of hundreds, if not thousands, of non-government organizations and groups who are determined to apply boycotts of any Israeli products. But about 10 years ago, I wrote an article, even then, when it was an issue, and to highlight the fraud of their argument, because these people are to instruct other people to boycott Israel and not to buy Israeli products, don't do it themselves. I wrote an article that went viral over the social media at that time, and the article was called, "If you're going to boycott Israel, do it properly." The message was that, if you want to boycott Israel, you have this principle about you're targeting the Jewish state. So throw away your computer, throw away your mobile phones, because none of these things work, because of you've got a tiny Israeli brain in all of them, because of Israel, the startup nation. And check your medicines as well, because a lot of the pharmaceuticals and medical systems you have in the hospitals originate from Israel technologies in Israel's pharmaceutical industry. So, people lie their way to try and persuade other people to boycott Israel. At the end of the day, Israel today, 10 years later than that article, is so much more prosperous and so much more impressive. I mentioned the startup nation. Basically, all your listeners, you may not know it, but whatever you go in your daily lives, you carry a part of Israel around with you, even in the cell phone. Even if you're listening to this talk between you and I, Anthony, on your computer, without the Microsoft and Intel and all the high-tech and the messaging services, all this has got a part of Israel you carry around with you all the time. So basically, Israel is stronger because of the export that we do from this tiny country is a modern miracle, if you like.
Yes.
And this is what brought me round to write this new book, which suddenly became a bestseller on Amazon, BDS for Idiots. Now, I guess, Anthony, for the sake of your American listeners, I should have called it BDS for Dummies, because I suppose idiots comes from my old English background rather than dummies. But the book is about the BDS. There are two ways you can go. You can either take the BDS activists and the boycotters seriously, but the better way to deal with them, and that is to laugh at them and to ridicule them and show the impotence of their messaging and their arguments, as I do in the book.
Is there a website that people can look to learn more about your book?
Well, I'd suggest if your listeners can take this down rather than a website, you can go onto the Amazon book page and just type in BDS for Idiots. And that'll give you a brief description, and you can open up the book. You know, they have one of these apps that you can read through part of the book, so you can see it there as well and get a gist of what it's all about. And it's an interesting book. It's a fun book, and it actually made, within a few days of being up on Amazon, it became number one on what they call their hot new releases. And I guess it's because it's a fun book. It's a great read. There are one or two serious articles, but a lot of it is fun. I even have a couple of quizzes in the book. I have the Palestine quiz, for instance. You know, this was a quiz that, for instance, asked, you know, people want to reconstruct history, and they say that, you know, Israel is forged on a land that was once a state of Palestine, right? There was never a state of Palestine. You and I know that,
right?
Anthony, is that correct? So I put a little quiz in there, you know, as if I was writing it for these BDS and Israel deniers and the pro-Palestinians. And I asked the question here, you know, fun quiz. You want to, when was the country of Palestine founded and by who? And where was its capital? Where was its borders? What was the unique language of this Palestine? What was the name of its currency? What type of government did it have? So I question the whole page of these questions in the Palestine quiz, so people can really get a grip on the fact that there was no such state as Palestine. And then I have another fun chapter which is called a BDS dictionary. In other words, I take the sort of expressions you see in the media, or even the narrative of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian camp, and I use their words, and I put, in a sense, a humorous sort of aspect on it. You know, when you ever hear of any Israeli response to the terrorism of Hamas and people like against us, they call our act aggression. You've heard that, Anthony, yes?
Yes.
So what's the definition of aggression? I put it here as killing people who are trying to kill you. And whenever for instance, Hamas launched thousands of rockets against Israel, and we have to send our forces in, and they call whatever we do a disproportionate response. They always call an Israeli action a disproportionate response. So, you know, what's the definition, our definition of a disproportionate response? Winning. Because you're not supposed to win these battles.
I understand.
So as you read through the book, you'll find it's a good humored in the vein read. It's a great read, and I want to tell you, it appeals actually is very good because it appeals to a lot of the younger elements, the students who are on campuses, and that really the campuses in America are some of the white-hot hate centers against Israel. If you're a Jew or you're even a pro-Israel Christian on campus, life is very difficult for you because of the intimidation that's going on over there by the left-wing people, students and professors on campuses, together with others. Because hitting on Israel and hitting on Israel supporters has become the flavor of the month, if you like, on a lot of campuses, which is really another form of anti-Semitism.
Well, regarding
so this book is particular appeal to the students there.
You know, regarding this issue about the college campuses, I'm just looking at a news report here from Haaretz, maybe considered a liberal one news service, but the title is "Israel Should Back Off Anti-BDS Fight on U.S. Campuses," Jewish leader says.
I expect that from Haaretz because Haaretz is often, it may be an Israeli newspaper, if it's a left-wing Israeli newspaper in support of people like BDS, etc. So he wants us to back off. And one of the reasons he wants us to back off, I can tell you, really, Anthony, in the last couple of months, because we have taken the tactics and the battle to them, one of the things that I do is set up support groups for Israel in a lot of countries. And what has been happening is we are now starting to win. The BDS movement are suffering one defeat after another. So, of course, the Haaretz is getting worried about this. Now, of course, they're asking for Israel to back off. There is no way we're going to back off. We're going to go into these liars and deceivers and expose their fraud harder than ever. The game has only just begun from our point of view.
You know, there's a real concern here in the U.S. About moral decline. Here we have Franklin Graham on a 50-state tour, and there's an Old Testament verse, 2 Chronicles 7:14, that that talks about turning from wickedness, and the U.S. has got so much wickedness, and I believe that's why we are having the Muslim. We're being invaded by Muslims, and even in Israel history, I remember that when Israel would not turn from wickedness, terrorists were allowed into their country.
Yes. Well, look, you can see this happen. I know there's a big issue in the presidential campaign right now about the concern that America is being infiltrated by people who intend harm. I want to tell you, you can look at the European model and just have your listeners look at the news or look at what's happening in Europe. Europe is in chaos and decay right now simply because they had this open border, tolerant, compassionate attitude, but they didn't realize the reality of what was hitting them. They are being hit by a tsunami of people, ranging from people with a total disconnect without any intention of adopting the norms and standards of the countries that are hosting them. And it's led to a massive increase of crime, not just terrorism. Terrorism, of course, you're hearing this all the time. You will hear every month or so about major terrorist attacks within Europe. But what you don't hear is the massive amounts of crime that has happened within America. Norway expelled 824 Muslim migrants about 6-8 months ago, and their violent crime rate went down by 30%. So even if you're not talking about terrorism, the decay that you will have within America if you allow an unchallenged, an unchecked, and unverified immigration is going to be absolutely fraught for the American social fabric.
Oh, it's a very serious problem, Barry, and I'm looking forward to having you join me again on one of our broadcasts. It's so important for people to learn about this BDS movement. And
can I ask something through you to your listeners, the people listening to this? What I would suggest to any listeners who are curious about either the boycott movement against Israel or BDS movement, you should contact Anthony and his station. Raise any questions that you have there about this or any other issues that concern you about Israel, or how Israel, the way we respond to certain issues, can be an example to America. And I'd be happy to have Anthony call me back onto the program and answer your concerns.
Well, thank you, Barry, for joining me today and sharing about the truth about the BDS movement, this boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Please pray for the peace of Jerusalem and Israel, and for Barry and all people in Israel. And I look forward to talking with you again, Barry. Thank you.
I want to thank you again, Anthony, for having me on. I want to thank your listeners also for their passionate support for Israel. Be assured that we stay strong. And if you have any concerns, feel certain that I'm here to help you in any way that I can.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Barry.
Shalom. Thank you.
Shalom. Bye.
I'm Dr. Anthony Harper here with the InterMountain Christian News Hour, an outreach of the InterMountain Christian newspaper making a difference. And we need your support of good news. Check out our website at IMCNews.org, where you can download our newspaper and make your tax-deductible donation to support our voice, our Christian concerns at the White House and in Israel and other places. Do go online to make your donation and to support this important news ministry, the only evangelical Christian newspaper of its kind, a grassroots newspaper in our Intermountain regions, spanning from Colorado over to Reno, Nevada. And we currently have needs to cover our travel expenses for White House and Israel trips. And also, we need a donated minivan, a vehicle, a good condition, low mileage, air conditioning, and automatic transmission for delivery of our newspapers and other news events that we go to cover, representing Christian concerns. So please make your donation tax deductible online at imcnews.org just by clicking on the donate banner ad that you see there. Thank you for your support of our good newspaper, and for your prayers, most importantly, that we can continue to be a voice of truth for Christians in our Intermountain region, for the glory of God.